He was just a quiet single dad mopping floors in a luxury hotel, invisible to everyone, until four men in black suits cornered the billionaire CEO in the penthouse elevator. No one knew his past. No one expected what he'd do next. But when his young daughter whispered from the service corridor, "Papa, should we help that scared lady?" everything changed. What happened in those next 12 hours would expose a corporate conspiracy, reveal skills honed in the darkest operations, and ignite a connection neither of them saw coming. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about the courage to step forward when everyone else steps back, about trust earned in moments of chaos, and about the quiet strength of a man who walked away from danger, but runs toward it when someone innocent needs protecting. What unfolds will leave you breathless, inspired, and believing that heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they wear janitorial uniforms and carry mops instead of weapons. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the Obsidian Grand Hotel, one of the most exclusive properties in the heart of Seattle. The lobby gleamed with polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers that sparkled like frozen starlight, and soft jazz music that drifted through the air like expensive perfume. Guests moved through this space with the quiet confidence of people who never had to check price tags or worry about tomorrow. And then there was Wesley Ford. He pushed his cleaning cart across the lobby floor at exactly 9:47 p.m., the wheels squeaking softly against the tile. His navy blue uniform was clean but worn at the elbows, his name tag slightly crooked. He wore black work boots that had seen better days and carried a spray bottle in one hand, a microfiber cloth in the other. To everyone around him, he was part of the furniture, invisible, forgettable, just another worker keeping the machinery of luxury running smoothly. But if anyone had bothered to look closely, really look, they might have noticed the way his eyes scanned every corner of the room. The way his posture stayed balanced even when he leaned over to wipe down a table. The way his hands, rough and calloused, moved with surgical precision. And if they looked even closer, they might have seen the faint scar along his jawline, barely visible under the dim lighting, a reminder of a life he no longer spoke about. Wesley had been working at the Obsidian Grand for 8 months, long enough to know every service corridor, every blind spot in the security cameras, every exit route, long enough to memorize the faces of the regulars, the high rollers, the ones who tipped well and the ones who didn't tip at all. But not long enough to stop feeling like he was hiding, because that's exactly what he was doing. 3 years ago, Wesley Ford had been one of the top tactical officers in the Seattle SWAT division. He'd led hostage negotiations, coordinated high-risk raids, and trained younger officers in close-quarters combat. His record had been spotless, his instincts legendary. But then came the operation that changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine warrant service. A drug house on the east side, low-level dealers, minimal resistance expected. But the intel had been wrong. Dead wrong. When his team breached the door, they walked into an ambush. 2 officers went down in the first 10 seconds. Wesley had pulled them both to safety, taking 3 bullets in the process, 1 in the shoulder, 1 grazing his ribs, and 1 that shattered his left kneecap. He survived. His team survived. But his career didn't. The department offered him a desk job, a medal, a promotion even. But Wesley couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't sit in briefing rooms and send other people into danger. Couldn't look at his daughter and pretend he wasn't one bad call away from never coming home. So he turned in his badge, took his pension payout, and disappeared into the kind of work where no one asked questions. Now he mopped floors, fixed leaking faucets, restocked minibar fridges, and every night he went home to the small apartment he shared with his daughter, cooked her dinner, helped her with homework, and pretended that this quiet, simple life was enough. Most nights. It was. Tonight would not be one of those nights. Wesley was wiping down the brass railing near the elevator bank when he heard the commotion. It started as a ripple, a shift in the energy of the lobby. Voices dropped. Heads turned. Security personnel straightened their posture and adjusted their earpieces. Then she walked in. Finelle Crestwind. Wesley recognized her immediately. Everyone did. At 39 years old, Finelle was the founder and CEO of Helix Dynamics, a tech empire valued at over $18 billion. Her company specialized in quantum encryption and cybersecurity solutions used by governments, banks, and Fortune 500 companies worldwide. She'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine twice, interviewed by 60 Minutes, and named one of the most influential women in technology 3 years running. She wore a charcoal wool coat over a tailored black dress, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek bun. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she moved toward the private elevator reserved for penthouse guests. 2 security guards flanked her, both in dark suits, both scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. But something was off. Wesley's instincts kicked in before his brain could catch up. He'd spent too many years reading body language, analyzing threats, watching for the things that didn't belong. And right now, there were 4 men in the lobby who didn't belong. They weren't dressed like tourists. They weren't dressed like business travelers. They wore black tactical jackets, dark jeans, and boots with reinforced toes. Their hands stayed close to their waistbands. Their eyes tracked Finelle's every movement, and they were positioning themselves. One near the front entrance, one by the concierge desk, one lingering near the elevator bank, and one, the tallest of the group, standing just outside the restroom corridor with a clear line of sight to the penthouse elevator. Wesley's pulse quickened. His grip tightened on the spray bottle. Every instinct he'd buried for 3 years suddenly roared back to life. He glanced toward the security desk. The hotel guards were busy checking in a large group of conference attendees. They hadn't noticed. Finelle's personal security were focused on her immediate perimeter. They hadn't noticed either, but Wesley had. He set down his cleaning supplies and moved toward the service corridor, walking quickly but not running. He pushed through the unmarked door and stepped into the narrow hallway that ran parallel to the main lobby. His daughter was there, sitting on an overturned plastic crate, coloring in a notebook. Ava Ford was 9 years old, with her father's sharp eyes and her late mother's dark curls. She looked up and grinned. "Papa, I drew you a superhero cape, see? It's got lightning bolts." Wesley knelt beside her, his voice calm but firm. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. But I need you to do something for me right now." Her smile faded. She knew that tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he lied gently. "But I need you to go into the storage room and stay there until I come get you. Can you do that?" Ava's eyes searched his face. Then she nodded slowly. "Like the drill we practiced?" "Exactly like the drill." She stood, clutching her notebook to her chest. But before she turned away, she looked back at him. "Papa, is someone in trouble?" Wesley hesitated. Then he said quietly, "Maybe, but I'm going to make sure they're okay." Ava bit her lip. Then she whispered, "Should we help that scared lady?" Wesley blinked. "What lady?" "The one in the fancy coat." She looked scared, even though she was smiling. Out of the mouths of the young. Wesley's chest tightened. His daughter had seen what trained security guards had missed. Finelle Crestwind wasn't just another VIP passing through. She was afraid. Wesley cupped Ava's cheek. "Yes, sweetheart. We should help her." Ava nodded solemnly, then slipped into the storage room and quietly closed the door behind her. Wesley stood, rolled his shoulders, and stepped back into the corridor. His mind was already shifting gears, analyzing angles, calculating risks. He didn't have a weapon, didn't have backup, didn't have authority, but he had experience. And he had something more important than any of that. He had a reason to act, because somewhere in this hotel, a woman was in danger. And Wesley Ford had spent too long hiding from who he used to be. Tonight, that ended. Final Crestwin stepped into the private elevator and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing her inside the mirrored cage. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, controlled, composed. The mask she'd perfected over 15 years of boardrooms, investor meetings, and hostile takeovers. But beneath the surface, her heart was racing. She pressed the button for the 23rd floor, the penthouse suite she'd reserved under a false name. Her security team had swept the room twice. Her assistant had confirmed that the reservation through an encrypted channel. Everything was supposed to be secure, but Finel hadn't survived this long in the tech world by trusting supposed to be. Her company, Helix Dynamics, had started in a garage with 2 laptops and a dream. Now it employed over 12,000 people across 6 continents. She'd built an empire on the promise of unbreakable encryption, on the idea that privacy was a right, not a commodity. But that same technology had made her enemies, powerful ones. 3 weeks ago, she'd received the first threat. An encrypted email with no return address, no signature, just a single line of text. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Return it or we'll take it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd forwarded it to her security team. They'd traced it to a server farm in Eastern Europe, then hit a dead end. The second message came 5 days later. This time, it included a photo of her leaving her office building. The third message had arrived yesterday. No words. Just a picture of her hotel reservation confirmation. Someone was watching. Someone knew where she was. And someone was getting closer. Finel had tried to cancel the trip, but this meeting couldn't be rescheduled. She was here to finalize a partnership with a Japanese cybersecurity firm, a deal worth $300 million. A deal that could change the trajectory of her company. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Couldn't afford to let fear dictate her decisions. So she'd come to Seattle. Increased her security. Taken every precaution. And still, she felt the weight of invisible eyes on her. The elevator climbed smoothly, the numbers ticking upward on the display. Finel closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She thought about the empire she'd built, the employees who depended on her, the technology that protected millions of people around the world. She thought about her younger sister, Grace, who died 2 years ago from complications during surgery. Grace had been her anchor, her best friend, the only person who'd ever truly understood her. Since her death, Finel had thrown herself into work, into growth, into building something that would outlast her. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt small, vulnerable, alone. The elevator jolted. Finel's eyes snapped open. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The numbers on the display froze at the 18th floor. Her pulse spiked. "Hello?" She called out, her voice sharper than she intended. "Is anyone there?" Silence. She reached for the emergency call button, but before her finger touched it, the elevator speaker crackled to life. "Miss Crestwind," a calm, unfamiliar voice said. "Please remain calm. We're experiencing a minor technical issue. Maintenance is on the way." Finel's jaw tightened. "Who is this?" "Hotel operations, ma'am." Nothing to worry about. But something in the tone, the too smooth delivery, the slight delay before the words, set off every alarm bell in her mind. She pressed the emergency button. Nothing happened. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Her breathing quickened. She turned toward the mirrored walls and saw her own reflection staring back, wide-eyed and pale. Then, in the reflection, she saw something else. The elevator panel. The numbers weren't frozen at 18. They were descending, slowly, quietly. 17, 16, 15. Someone had overridden the system. Fennell's mind raced. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister of pepper spray, the only weapon she'd been allowed to carry past hotel security. Her fingers closed around it tightly. The elevator continued its slow descent. 14, 13, 12. She pressed herself against the back wall, eyes fixed on the doors. Whoever was waiting for her on the other side. She wouldn't go down without a fight. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the elevator stopped. The lights went out completely. Fennell's breath caught in her throat. Darkness swallowed her whole. And then, from somewhere above her, she heard a sound, a soft metallic click. Like a hatch opening. Someone was coming. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Wesley Ford moved through the service stairwell like a shadow. His knee ached, the old injury flaring up as he took the steps 2 at a time, but he ignored it. He'd learned long ago how to push through pain. He reached the 12th floor and paused, pressing his ear against the door. Voices, low, clipped, professional. He recognized the cadence. Tactical communication. He eased the door open, just enough to peer through the crack. 2 of the men in black jackets stood in the hallway, one on each side of the elevator bank. They weren't hotel security. They weren't private bodyguards. They were operators. Wesley's jaw clenched. He'd seen men like this before. Ex-military, ex-agency, the kind who worked off the books for the highest bidder. They moved with precision, communicated in hand signals, and carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who'd done this many times before. One of them spoke into a radio. Packages contained. Extraction in 2 minutes. Package. They were talking about Fennell. Wesley's mind shifted into overdrive. He didn't have time to call the police. Didn't have time to alert hotel security. By the time anyone responded, she'd be gone. He was the only one who could stop this. He scanned the hallway. A housekeeping cart sat abandoned near a guest room door. He moved toward it silently, his years of tactical training guiding every step. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount, tested its weight, and tucked it under his arm. Then he stepped into the hallway. The first operative turned, eyes narrowing. Maintenance. This floor is closed. Wesley didn't respond. He just walked forward, pushing the housekeeping cart ahead of him, head down, shoulders slouched. Playing the part, the operative stepped closer. I said this floor is. Wesley swung the fire extinguisher in a tight arc. The impact caught the man across the temple. He dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the carpet. The second operative spun, hand reaching for the weapon concealed under his jacket. But Wesley was faster. He drove the base of the extinguisher into the man's solar plexus, then swept his leg. The operative crashed into the wall, gasping for air. Wesley followed up with a controlled strike to the back of the neck. 2 down. 2 to go. Wesley dragged both bodies into an empty guest room. Zip-tied their wrists with plastic bands from the housekeeping cart, and pulled the door shut behind him. Then he turned toward the elevator. Inside, Fennell was alone in the dark, heart pounding. Pepper spray clutched in one trembling hand, and above her, the ceiling hatch creaked open. The darkness inside the elevator was absolute. Fennell's breathing echoed off the mirrored walls, each inhale sharp and shallow. She pressed her back against the corner, pepper spray raised, thumb hovering over the trigger. Her eyes strained against the blackness, searching for shapes, for movement, for anything. The metallic creak above her head grew louder. Then, a beam of light pierced the darkness. A flashlight, cutting through the void like a blade. It swept across the elevator ceiling, then down toward her face. Fennell squinted, raising her free hand to shield her eyes. "Miss Crustwind," a voice called down. Low, controlled, professional. "I need you to remain calm." We're here to escort you to safety. Fennell's grip on the pepper spray tightened. Who are you? Private security. Your executive team hired us after the threats escalated. We're here to get you out before things get worse. It sounded plausible, almost convincing. But Fennell hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by accepting things at face value. If you're private security, she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest, then tell me the code phrase my team was supposed to use. Silence. The flashlight beam stayed fixed on her face. UNMOVING. Then the voice came again, colder this time. Miss Crustwind, we don't have time for verification protocols. There's a credible threat in this building. We need to move, now. Fennell's heart hammered against her ribs. No code phrase. No credentials. No protocol. These weren't her people. She shifted her weight, readying herself. I'm not going anywhere with you. The flashlight clicked off. For a moment, everything was silent. Then she heard it. The sound of something dropping into the elevator shaft. A rope. Heavy, industrial grade. Someone was coming down. Fennell's mind raced. The elevator doors were jammed. The emergency call button was disabled. Her phone had no signal. She was trapped in a steel box with no way out and armed operatives, descending from above. But she wasn't helpless. She pulled off one of her heels. A 5-inch stiletto with a reinforced steel tip, and gripped it like a weapon. Her other hand stayed locked on the pepper spray. If they wanted her, they'd have to work for it. The rope swayed. Boots hit the elevator roof with a dull thud. Then a different sound. Sharp. Sudden. A grunt of surprise followed by a heavy impact. The rope went slack. Fennell froze. Listening, scuffling, a muffled curse. Then silence again. Miss Crustwind, a new voice called down. This one was different. Rougher, American, urgent, but not threatening. My name is Wesley Ford. I work maintenance at this hotel. I need you to trust me for the next 60 seconds. Fennell's pulse spiked. How do I know you're not with them? You don't, Wesley said bluntly. But in about 30 seconds, 2 more men are going to reach this elevator. And when they do, you're either coming with me or you're going with them. Your choice. Fennell hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to wait for real help. But real help wasn't coming. And whoever this man was, he'd just taken down one of the operatives trying to breach the elevator. What do you need me to do? She asked. There's an emergency hatch release on the left side of the control panel. Red lever. Pull it. Fennell felt along the panel in the dark, her fingers brushing cold metal until they found the lever. She yanked it down. The ceiling hatch clicked open fully. Now step back, Wesley ordered. She did. A moment later, a hand reached down through the opening. Grab on. Reach down through the opening. Grab on. Fennell looked up at the silhouette, backlit by the dim light from the elevator shaft. She couldn't see his face. Couldn't verify who he was or what his intentions were, but she could hear the sound of footsteps echoing down the stairwell. Getting closer, she grabbed his hand. Wesley's grip was iron strong. He pulled her up with surprising ease, hauling her through the hatch and onto the elevator roof in one smooth motion. The moment her feet touched the metal surface, he steadied her and pointed toward a service ladder bolted to the shaft wall. Climb, he said. Don't look down. Don't stop. Fennell kicked off her remaining heel and started climbing, her dress restricting her movement, but adrenaline overriding the discomfort. Below her, she heard the elevator doors being pried open. Shouts, radio chatter. Wesley climbed behind her, his movements efficient and controlled despite the awkwardness of the narrow space. When they reached the 14th floor, he pried open the maintenance access door and pulled her through into a dimly lit corridor. This way, he said. Moving quickly but quietly down the hall, Fennell followed, her mind spinning. Who were those men? I don't know, Wesley said. But they weren't amateurs. Are you security? No. Police? Not anymore. They reached a service elevator at the far end of the corridor. Wesley punched in a code on the panel and the doors opened immediately. He ushered her inside and hit the button for the basement level dot as the elevator descended. Fennell finally got a good look at him. Tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of physical work, not a gym. His face was weathered but kind, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His janitor's uniform was rumpled, and there was a fresh cut above his eyebrow. "You're bleeding," she said. Wesley touched his forehead absently. "Occupational hazard. Maintenance doesn't usually involve rooftop combat. It does tonight." The elevator doors opened into the basement. Wesley led her through a maze of storage rooms and mechanical corridors, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the building. Finally, they reached a small break room tucked away in a forgotten corner. He locked the door behind them and gestured toward a chair. "Sit, catch your breath." Fennell sank into the chair, her legs trembling from adrenaline. "Why did you help me?" Wesley leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because someone needed to. That's not an answer." He met her gaze. "My daughter saw you in the lobby. She said you looked scared. She asked if we should help." Fennell blinked. "Your daughter? She's 9. She's safe. But she was right. You were scared. And those men weren't here to protect you." Fennell's throat tightened. A 9-year-old had seen what trained security guards had missed. "What's your daughter's name?" "Ava. Where is she now?" "Storage room on the lobby level. Locked door. She knows the drill." Fennell frowned. "The drill?" Wesley's expression darkened. "I used to be SWAT, before I wasn't." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You taught her what to do in an emergency. I taught her how to stay safe when the world stops making sense." Before Fennell could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, purposeful, multiple sets. Wesley straightened, his entire demeanor shifting. "They're sweeping the building." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I do." He moved to the door and pressed his ear against it, listening. The footsteps grew closer, then paused. A radio crackled. "Basement level clear." Moving to sub-level 2. The footsteps receded. Wesley turned back to Fennell. "We need to get you out of this hotel. But first, I need to know what they want from you." Fennell hesitated. Trust didn't come easy to her. But this man had just saved her life without asking for anything in return. 3 weeks ago, she began quietly, I received encrypted files. Leaked documents from a black-budget defense contractor. Evidence of illegal surveillance programs. Backdoor access to encrypted communications. Crimes against privacy on a global scale. Wesley's eyes narrowed. "And you have these files?" "Not with me. But I have the decryption key. It's biometrically linked to me. Without it, the files are useless. So they need you alive. For now." Wesley processed this. "Who sent you the files?" "I don't know. The sender was anonymous. But whoever it was, they trusted me to do the right thing." "And what's the right thing?" Fennell met his gaze. "Expose the truth. No matter the cost." Wesley nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make sure you survive long enough to do it." The break room felt smaller with every passing second. Fennell sat on the edge of the worn couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Wesley stood by the door, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, tracking every sound from the corridor outside. The fluorescent light overhead flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows across the cinder block walls. A coffee maker burbled in the corner, half full and long forgotten. The air smelled like stale grounds and industrial cleaner. Fennell broke the silence. "You said you used to be SWAT." Wesley nodded but didn't elaborate. What happened? He glanced at her, weighing whether to answer. Finally he said, bad intel. Good people got hurt. I left before I could make it worse. That doesn't sound like the whole story. It's the only part that matters. Finel studied him. She'd spent her entire career reading people, identifying the ones who lied smoothly and the ones who hid the truth behind carefully chosen words. Wesley was the latter. Whatever had happened, it still haunted him. Why become a janitor? She asked. Because no one looks at janitors. No one asks questions. I could keep my head down, raise my daughter, and stay out of trouble. Until tonight. Wesley's jaw tightened. Until tonight. Finel leaned back, her mind racing through the implications. Those men upstairs, they weren't hired by some random criminal organization. They moved like professionals. Military-grade training. Coordinated communication. Access to building security systems. I know. Which means someone with serious resources wants those files. And they're willing to kill for them. Wesley pushed off the wall and crossed to the small window set high in the corner. He peered through the reinforced glass into the loading dock area beyond. Empty. For now. We need to get you somewhere secure, he said. Somewhere off the grid. Do you have anyone you trust? Anyone who can help? Finel hesitated. My head of security. But his phone was disconnected 2 hours ago. Either he's compromised, or he's already dead. Wesley turned back to her. What about law enforcement? I reported the threats to the FBI 3 days ago. They assigned an agent to my case. I haven't heard from him since, so we're on our own. Looks that way. Wesley ran a hand through his hair, thinking. He'd been in situations like this before. High stakes, no backup, lives on the line. But back then, he'd had a team, resources, authority. Now he had nothing but instinct and a decade-old skill set he'd tried to bury. There's a service tunnel that runs under the hotel, he said. It connects to the municipal maintenance system. If we can reach it, we can move through the underground network and surface 6 blocks away. And your daughter? Wesley's expression softened. I get her first. Then we move. Finel stood. Then let's go. They moved through the basement corridors in silence, Wesley leading the way with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd memorized every inch of the building's layout. Finel followed close behind, her bare feet silent on the concrete floor. They reached a narrow stairwell that led back up to the ground level. Wesley paused at the bottom, listening. Footsteps above. 2 sets. Moving away. He motioned for Finel to wait, then climbed the stairs alone. At the top, he eased the door open a crack and peered through. The corridor was empty, but he could hear voices echoing from somewhere nearby. He returned to Finel and whispered, We move fast. Stay close. If something goes wrong, don't stop. Just run. She nodded. They ascended the stairs together. Wesley led her through a maze of service hallways, ducking into alcoves whenever they heard approaching footsteps, freezing in shadowed corners when voices drew too close. It was a delicate dance, one wrong move away from disaster. Finally, they reached the storage room where Ava was waiting. Wesley knocked softly, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones. A code. The door unlocked from the inside. Ava stood there, clutching her coloring notebook to her chest. Her eyes were wide but dry. She wasn't crying. Wesley had taught her not to panic, even when everything else did. Papa, she breathed, relief flooding her face. Wesley knelt and pulled her into a tight embrace. You did perfect, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Ava looked past him at Finel, who stood in the doorway, disheveled and barefoot but trying to smile. Is that the scared lady? Ava asked. Finel stepped forward and crouched down to Ava's level. My name is Finel. And yes, I was scared. But your papa helped me. You were very brave to tell him." Ava's eyes searched Fennell's face with the unguarded curiosity of someone too young to understand the weight of the moment. "Are the bad people still looking for you?" "Yes," Fennell said honestly. "But your papa is going to make sure we're safe." Ava looked up at Wesley. "Are you going to fight them?" Wesley brushed a curl away from her face. "Only if I have to. But mostly, I'm going to keep you safe. Both of you." Ava nodded solemnly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic whistle on a keychain. She held it out to Fennell. "This is for emergencies. Papa gave it to me. But I think you need it more." "Gave it to me. But I think you need it more." Fennell's throat tightened. She took the whistle carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Thank you, Ava. I'll take very good care of it." Wesley stood and lifted Ava into his arms. "We're going on an adventure. But it's the quiet kind. Can you do that?" Ava wrapped her arms around his neck. "I can be so quiet, you won't even know I'm here. That's my girl." They moved as a unit now, Wesley carrying Ava on one hip while keeping Fennell close behind him. The corridor felt longer than before, every shadow a potential threat. Every sound amplified by adrenaline. They were halfway to the service tunnel entrance when Wesley heard footsteps. Coming fast, he pushed Fennell and Ava into a recessed doorway and pressed himself against the wall. A moment later, 2 operatives rounded the corner, moving with tactical precision. Wesley didn't hesitate. He set Ava down gently behind him and stepped into their path. The first operative barely had time to react before Wesley closed the distance. He deflected the man's reaching hand, drove an elbow into his ribs, and swept his legs out from under him. The operative hit the ground hard, his radio clattering across the floor. The second operative drew a weapon, but Wesley was already moving. He grabbed a metal shelving bracket from the wall and swung it in a tight arc, striking the operative's wrist. The gun fell. Wesley followed up with a palm strike to the sternum. Then a controlled takedown that left the man gasping on the floor. Both operatives were unconscious within seconds. Wesley retrieved the fallen radio and crushed it under his boot. Then he turned back to Fennell and Ava, breathing hard but steady. "Still with me?" he asked. Fennell stared at him, wide-eyed. "Who are you?" Wesley picked up Ava again and started moving. "Right now? I'm the only chance you've got." They reached the service tunnel entrance, a heavy steel door marked with faded warning signs. Wesley entered a code into the keypad, and the lock disengaged with a metallic clunk. He pulled the door open and ushered them inside. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, lit only by dim emergency lights spaced every 20 feet. The air was cooler here, tinged with the smell of damp concrete and old pipes. Wesley pulled a flashlight from his belt and clicked it on. "Stay close. Watch your step." They descended into the tunnel. The door ceiling shut behind them with a hollow boom that echoed through the passage. Above them, in the hotel, alarms began to wail. Fennell looked back toward the sealed door. "They know we're gone." Wesley adjusted Ava in his arms and started walking. "Then we'd better move fast." As they disappeared into the underground labyrinth, Ava whispered into her father's ear, "Papa, are we heroes now?" Wesley glanced at Fennell, who was walking beside them with her head held high despite everything. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're just people doing what's right." But in that moment, in the darkness beneath the city, with danger closing in from all sides, they felt like something more. They felt like hope. The tunnel stretched before them like the throat of some sleeping beast. Water dripped from rusted pipes overhead, creating a rhythmic percussion that echoed off the concrete walls. Wesley's flashlight cut through the darkness in sweeping arcs, illuminating graffiti tags, abandoned equipment, and the occasional rats skittering into the shadows. Ava had gotten quiet, her face pressed against Wesley's shoulder. Fennell walked beside them, one hand trailing along the wall for balance, the other clutching the plastic whistle Ava had given her like a talisman. They'd been walking for 15 minutes when Wesley stopped abruptly. He set Ava down gently and motioned for silence. Both Fennell and Ava froze, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of voices echoing through the tunnel behind them. Distant but growing closer, Wesley's jaw tightened. They'd been found faster than he'd expected. Someone had access to building schematics, knew the tunnel system, and was coordinating the pursuit with military efficiency. He scanned their surroundings. 20 feet ahead, a junction split the tunnel in 3 directions. He moved quickly to examine each passage, shining his light down corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity. "This one," he said, pointing to the rightmost tunnel. "It leads toward the old subway maintenance station. Multiple exits, harder to track." Fennell helped Ava to her feet, and they started moving again, faster now. Wesley's mind was already 3 steps ahead. Calculating distances, estimating pursuit speed, identifying choke points. They reached a section where the tunnel widened into a small chamber, filled with abandoned maintenance equipment. Wesley stopped and surveyed the space with tactical precision. Old pipes, rusted toolboxes, coils of electrical wire, and a stack of wooden pallets. "Wait here," he told Fennell, handing her the flashlight. "What are you doing?" she asked, buying us time. Wesley worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He dragged several pallets across the tunnel entrance, creating a partial barrier. Then he looped electrical wire across the passage at ankle height, securing it to pipes on either side. Not enough to seriously injure, but enough to trip and disorient. He grabbed the metal toolbox and wedged it precariously atop the pallet stack. Then he scattered loose bolts and screws across the floor beyond the wire, creating a minefield of noise. Fennell watched in silence, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You're not just slowing them down. You're funneling them into a predictable path." Wesley glanced at her. "You think like a tactician. I think like a chess player. Same principle." He allowed himself a small smile. "Then you understand what comes next. We move fast while they waste time figuring out the trap." They left the chamber and continued deeper into the tunnel network. Behind them, the voices grew momentarily louder, then stopped. A clatter of metal, cursing. The trap had worked. Wesley picked up Ava again and broke into a controlled jog. Fennell kept pace beside him, her bare feet slapping against wet concrete. They turned left at another junction, then right, then descended a steep access stairwell that led even deeper underground. Finally, they emerged into an abandoned subway platform, long since closed to the public. Graffiti covered every surface, and the air smelled like rust and forgotten places. A single emergency exit sign glowed weakly at the far end. Wesley set Ava down and pulled out his phone. No signal as expected, but he'd memorized the route before they'd entered the tunnels. 3 more turns, 1 maintenance ladder, and they'd surface 6 blocks from the hotel in the basement of a parking structure. 5 more minutes, he said. Then we're clear. Fennell leaned against a support column, catching her breath. "Those men, they're not going to stop, I know. So what happens when we reach the surface? Where do we go?" Wesley met her gaze. "That depends on what you're willing to do with those files." Fennell straightened. "I'm going to release them. Every document, every piece of evidence. The world needs to know. That'll make you a target for the rest of your life. I'm already a target. At least this way, it'll mean something." Wesley nodded slowly. He recognized that look in her eyes. The same one he'd seen in the mirror years ago, before everything fell apart. The willingness to sacrifice everything for what you believed was right. "Then we get you somewhere safe first," he said. "Somewhere you can transmit the files without being traced. I have a contact. A journalist I trust. But I'd need secure access and time. I can get you both." Ava tugged on Wesley's sleeve. "Papa, are we going home after this?" Wesley knelt beside her, his expression softening. "Soon, sweetheart. I promise. Will the scared lady come with us?" He glanced at Finel, who was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. "For a little while," he said. "Until she's safe." Ava seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Okay, but she needs shoes. Her feet are all dirty." Despite everything, Finel laughed. It was a short, surprised sound that broke through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. "You're absolutely right, Ava," she said. "I definitely need shoes." They moved toward the emergency exit, Wesley in front, Finel and Ava close behind. The stairwell beyond was narrow and steep. Climbing toward street level. As they ascended, Wesley allowed himself one brief moment of hope. They'd evaded immediate capture, outsmarted a professional pursuit team, and bought themselves time. Against all odds, they were still alive, but he knew this was far from over. Whoever wanted those files had resources, patience, and no regard for collateral damage. The real fight was just beginning. And this time, Wesley Ford wasn't walking away. The parking structure basement was dark, cold, and mercifully empty. Wesley pushed open the emergency exit door and checked both directions before ushering Finel and Ava through. The door closed behind them with a hollow clang that echoed through the concrete cavern. Rows of cars sat in silent formation under flickering fluorescent lights. The smell of motor oil and exhaust hung in the stale air. Wesley moved quickly toward a service alcove near the elevator bank and pulled out his phone. Still no signal. They were too far underground. "We need to get to street level," he said. "But not through the main entrance." Finel nodded, scanning the space. "There'll be cameras. If they have access to city surveillance systems, they'll spot us the moment we emerge. Then we don't emerge where they expect. Wesley led them to a maintenance stairwell on the opposite end of the structure. The door was marked "Authorized Personnel Only," but the lock was old and simple. He produced a small multi-tool from his pocket and had it open in seconds. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, emerging into the back alley of a commercial building. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and reflective under the glow of neon signs and streetlights. The city hummed with late-night energy, oblivious to the life and death drama unfolding in its shadows. Wesley scanned the alley. "There's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks east. Public, well-lit, security cameras. They won't make a move in front of witnesses." "And then what?" Finel asked. "Then we figure out our next move." They walked quickly but not frantically, blending into the handful of pedestrians still out at this hour. Ava held Wesley's hand tightly, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Finel stayed close, acutely aware of every car that passed, every person they encountered. The diner appeared ahead, its windows glowing warm and yellow against the darkness. A neon sign buzzed and flickered. "Millie's Place, open 24 hours. Inside, the diner was almost empty. A tired waitress refilled coffee at the counter. An older man sat in a corner booth reading a newspaper. The smell of coffee and bacon grease filled the air. They took a booth in the back, away from the windows but with a clear view of the entrance. Wesley ordered coffee and hot chocolate, plus a plate of toast for Ava. When the waitress left, Finel finally allowed herself to collapse against the vinyl cushion. "I can't believe we made it," she breathed. "We made it this far," Wesley corrected. "We're not safe yet." Finel studied him across the table. In the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, she could see details she'd missed before. The scar along his jawline, the calluses on his knuckles, the way his eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing, constantly vigilant. "You said you left SWAT because good people got hurt," she said quietly. "What really happened?" Wesley's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ava, who was coloring on the back of a paper menu with a crayon the waitress had provided. "We got bad intelligence," he said finally. "Went into a situation blind. 2 of my team members were shot. I pulled them out, but I took 3 bullets doing it. One shattered my knee. That's not why you left." He met her gaze. "No, I left because the intelligence wasn't just bad. It was deliberately falsified. Someone in the chain of command fed us bad information to cover up their own operation. When I tried to report it, I was told to let it go. For the good of the department, they said. For the bigger picture. But you couldn't. I filed formal complaints. Contacted internal affairs. Pushed back against people who had a lot more power than I did." He paused. "They didn't fire me. They just made it clear that my career was over. Every assignment became a punishment. Every recommendation got ignored. So I took my pension buyout and left before I became the kind of person who stops caring." Fennell absorbed this. "You gave up everything because you refused to look the other way." "I gave up a job," Wesley said. "What I kept was more important. Your integrity. My daughter." He looked at Ava, who was humming softly as she colored. She'd already lost her mother. I couldn't let her lose her father too, even if he was still breathing. The waitress returned with their order. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the simple act of consuming food bringing a measure of normalcy to the surreal situation. Finally, Fennell spoke. "The files I have, they're not just about surveillance programs. They document a network of private contractors, former intelligence officers, corporate executives working together to manipulate markets, elections, and public policy. Everything from insider trading to blackmail to outright assassination." Wesley set down his coffee cup. "How did you get them?" "Someone sent them to me anonymously. I think it was someone on the inside who couldn't live with what they were doing anymore. Like you couldn't." She nodded. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to verify the information, cross-referencing with public records, confirming identities. It's all real, Wesley. Every document, every transaction, every name. And if I release it, hundreds of powerful people go to prison. And you become the most wanted person in the world. Yes." Wesley leaned back, processing. "Why you? Why did this person send the files to you specifically?" Fennell hesitated. "Because 5 years ago, I testified before Congress about privacy rights and encryption. I became the public face of digital security reform. Whoever sent these files knew I had the platform, the resources, and the courage to do something about it. Or they thought you did." She met his eyes. "I do." Wesley saw it then. The same fire that had driven him to stand up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. The same stubborn refusal to compromise when everything was on the line. "Then we make sure you survive long enough to light that fire," he said. Ava looked up from her coloring. "Papa, can Miss Fennell stay with us? She doesn't have anywhere to go." Wesley and Fennell exchanged glances. The question was innocent, childlike in its simplicity. But it cut to the heart of something neither of them had acknowledged yet. They were in this together now. Not by choice, but by circumstance and shared conviction. "For now," Wesley said gently to his daughter, "until we figure out where she be safe." Ava nodded, satisfied, and returned to her coloring. But Wesley knew the truth. There was no safe place anymore. Not for Fennell. Not while those files existed. The only way forward was through, and he was going to make sure she got there. Wesley's phone buzzed on the diner table, startling all 3 of them. He grabbed it quickly, checking the screen. A text message from an unknown number. "You can't hide forever. We know where you are." His blood went cold. He stood abruptly, scanning the diner. The older man was still reading his newspaper. The waitress was wiping down the counter. Everything looked normal. Too normal. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Now." Fennell didn't question. She gathered Ava's crayons and helped her slide out of the booth. Wesley dropped cash on the table, more than enough to cover the bill, and led them toward the back exit. They emerged into another alley, this one narrower and darker. Wesley's mind raced. How had they been found? He'd been careful, taken every precaution, used routes that weren't monitored. Unless someone was tracking them by other means, Dottie turned to Finel. "Your phone. Do you still have it?" She pulled it from her coat pocket. "Yes, but it's been off since the hotel." "Doesn't matter. If they have the resources I think they do, they can track it even when it's powered down." He took the phone from her, removed the battery, and dropped both pieces into a dumpster. "From now on, we assume everything electronic is compromised." They moved quickly through a series of alleys and side streets, Wesley using his knowledge of the city to stay off main thoroughfares. After 20 minutes of constant movement, they ducked into the covered entrance of a closed bookstore. Wesley pulled out his own phone, hesitated, then made a call. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Ford? That you?" "Yeah, it's me. I need a favor, Captain." There was a pause. "You haven't called me in 3 years. Must be serious." "It is. I've got a civilian in danger. High-profile target, professional pursuit team. I need a safe house and a way to contact the FBI field office without going through normal channels." Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of trouble are you in, Wesley?" "The kind where doing the right thing makes you a target. Can you help or not?" "Where are you?" Wesley gave their approximate location, careful not to be too specific. "All right," Captain Morrison said. "There's an old precinct station on Ashford Street. Been closed for 2 years, but the building's still secure. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes with what you need." "Thank you, Captain. Wesley? Be careful. If this is as big as you're making it sound, you're playing in a different league now." "I know." He ended the call and turned to Finel. "We've got a safe house." 30 minutes. They started moving again, but something gnawed at Wesley's mind. The timing of that text message. The speed with which they'd been located. It was too precise, too fast. They were halfway to the old precinct when Wesley's instincts screamed at him to stop. He pulled Finel and Ava into the shadowed doorway of an abandoned storefront. "What's wrong?" Finel asked. "I don't know. Something feels off." He peered around the corner toward Ashford Street. The old precinct building was visible 2 blocks ahead, dark and silent. No lights, no movement. Then he saw it. A black SUV parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted. Too clean. Too new. Out of place in this forgotten neighborhood. Wesley's stomach dropped. "It's a trap." "What do you mean?" "The safe house. They knew I'd reach out to someone I trusted. They've been listening." Finel's face went pale. "Your former captain?" "No, my phone." Wesley pulled out his cell and stared at it. They must have compromised it at the hotel. Every call, every text, they've been tracking everything. He dropped the phone and crushed it under his boot. But the damage was done. "So what now?" Finel asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. Wesley's mind raced through options, each one narrowing the possibilities. No phones, no contacts. No backup. They were completely isolated. "We disappear," he said. Completely off-grid. No technology, no predictable moves, nothing they can track or anticipate. For how long? And track or anticipate. For how long? Until we can get you to your journalist contact and transmit those files. Once they're public, you're no longer a target. You become a witness. Finel nodded, understanding the logic. "My contact is in Portland, 3 hours north." "Then that's where we go." Ava tugged on Wesley's jacket. "Papa, I'm tired." He knelt beside her, his heart breaking at the exhaustion in her young eyes. She'd been so brave, so strong. but she was still just a little one caught in an adult nightmare. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little longer, okay? Then we'll find somewhere safe where you can sleep." She nodded, trusting him completely. They moved away from the old precinct, melting back into the maze of streets and alleys. Behind them, Wesley saw figures emerging. From the black SUV, tactical gear visible even at this distance. But they were too late. Wesley Ford had spent years learning how to disappear. And tonight, he was putting every lesson to use. As they vanished into the darkness, Fennell whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Wesley glanced at her. This woman who'd built an empire, who carried secrets that could topple governments, who'd somehow become his responsibility in the span of a few hours. "We don't give up on people who are trying to do the right thing," he said simply. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd sacrificed everything for their principles, now bound together by circumstance and shared conviction. They had a long night ahead. But for the first time since this began, Wesley felt like they might actually survive it. The freight train yard stretched out before them like a skeletal maze, all rusted metal and forgotten machinery. Wesley led. Fennell and Ava through gaps in the chain-link fence, moving with the confidence of someone who'd scouted locations like this before. "Freight trains run north every 3 hours, he explained quietly. "Next one leaves in 40 minutes. We hop a car heading to Portland, stay out of sight, and we're there by dawn." Fennell looked uncertain. "Is that safe?" "Safer than staying here." They found shelter in an abandoned maintenance shed, the door hanging loose on its hinges. Inside, Wesley cleared a space and laid out his jacket for Ava to sit on. The little one curled up immediately, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "She's been so brave," Fennell said softly, watching Ava's eyes drift closed. "She learned it from her mother," Wesley replied. "Sarah was a paramedic, ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. Ava has that same heart. And you?" Wesley met her gaze. "I'm just trying to be worthy of them both." They sat in comfortable. Silence for a few minutes, listening to the distant sounds of the train yard. Then Fennell spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When this is over, when those files are public and I'm no longer running, what happens to you?" "To Ava?" Wesley considered the question. "We go back to our life. Small apartment, quiet job, homework and bedtime stories." "After everything you've done tonight, you really think you can go back to mopping floors?" "I don't mop floors because it's all I can do," Wesley said. "I do it because it's all I need to do. My daughter has a roof over her head, food on the table, and a father who comes home every night. That's enough, but is it enough for you?" He looked at her, this brilliant, fierce woman who'd risked everything for truth. "Tonight reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That skills don't define purpose. Actions do. I used those skills tonight. Not because I missed the life, but because someone needed help. That's the only reason that matters." Fennell smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her exhaustion. "Your daughter is lucky to have you, unlucky to have her." The sound of an approaching train rumbled through the ground. Wesley stood and peered through a crack in the shed wall. A long freight train was pulling into the yard, slowing but not stopping. "That's our ride," he said. "Stay close, move fast, and don't look back." They emerged from the shed, Ava now awake and alert. Wesley scooped her up and jogged alongside the moving train, searching for an open boxcar. He found one halfway down the line, its door partially ajar. "Now!" he shouted. He tossed Ava up into the car first, then helped Fennell climb aboard. Finally he hauled himself up, his damaged knee screaming in protest but holding. The train picked up speed, pulling away from the yard and into the night. Inside the boxcar, they collapsed against the wooden walls, breathing hard. Through the open door, the city lights of Seattle began to fade, replaced by the darkness of the open countryside. "We made it," Fennell said. disbelief in her voice. Wesley nodded. First part's done. Now comes the hard part. Getting the files out. Keeping you alive long enough to see it through. Fennell looked at him, her expression serious. Why are you doing this, Wesley? Really? You could have walked away at any point. Let someone else handle it, but you didn't. Wesley watched Ava, who'd fallen asleep again with her head on Fennell's lap. Because my daughter asked if we should help. And I couldn't tell her no. Not when helping was the right thing to do. Even if it costs you everything. Some things are worth the cost. The train carried them north through the darkness. 3 unlikely fugitives bound together by circumstance and conviction. Behind them, in the city they'd left, powerful people were mobilizing resources, calling in favors, tightening the net. But ahead lay possibility. A journalist who could broadcast the truth. A chance to expose corruption on a massive scale. And maybe, just maybe, a new beginning for all of them. As dawn approached, and the first light of morning began to paint the horizon, Wesley allowed himself a moment of hope. They weren't safe yet. The fight wasn't over, but they'd survived the night. And sometimes, that was victory enough. The freight train rolled into the outskirts of Portland, just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Wesley stood near the open boxcar door, watching the landscape transform from rural farmland to industrial zones to the distant skyline of the city proper. Ava stirred awake, rubbing her eyes with small fists. Fennell sat beside her, looking disheveled but determined. Her designer coat was smudged with dirt, her hair had come loose from its once sleek bun, and her bare feet were wrapped in strips of fabric Wesley had torn from his own shirt. Yet somehow she looked more real than she had in the hotel, more human, more present. We're almost there, Wesley said, checking his watch. It was just past 6 in the morning. The train will slow down near the freight depot in about 10 minutes. That's when we jump. Fennell nodded, helping Ava to her feet. The little one stretched and yawned, then looked up at Wesley with those impossibly trusting eyes. Papa, are we safe now? Wesley knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. We're getting there, sweetheart. Just a little bit longer. When the train slowed to navigate a junction, Wesley dropped to the ground first, then caught Ava as she jumped into his arms. Fennell followed, landing with surprising grace despite her bare feet. They moved quickly away from the tracks, cutting through a series of warehouse lots until they reached a quiet, residential street. The neighborhood was just beginning to wake. A few early risers walked dogs. A jogger passed by with earbuds in, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from a corner cafe. After the chaos of the night, the normalcy felt almost surreal. Wesley found a payphone outside a convenience store, one of the few remaining relics of a pre-cellular age. He fed it coins and dialed the number Fennell had memorized. It rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. Hello? My name is Wesley Ford. I'm calling on behalf of Fennell Crestwind. She needs to speak with you. It's urgent. There was a sharp intake of breath. Put her on. Wesley handed the phone to Fennell. She took it with trembling hands, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw tears threatening to spill over. Nathan, she said, her voice cracking, it's me. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. Wesley watched her face transform as she spoke, relief and exhaustion, and something close to hope flickering across her features. When she hung up, she turned to Wesley with tears streaming down her cheeks. He's sending a car. 20 minutes. He has a secure location where I can upload the files. Wesley nodded. Then we wait. They sat on a bench outside the convenience store, Ava between them, swinging her legs and humming a tune Wesley recognized from one of her favorite cartoons. For a few precious minutes, they simply existed in the morning light, 3 people who'd survived something terrible together. Fennell broke the silence. I don't know how to thank you. Wesley shook his head. You don't need to. Yes, I do. She turned to face him fully. You risked your life, your daughter's safety, Everything you've built for yourself. For a stranger. That's not something I can just walk away from without acknowledging. You're not a stranger anymore, Wesley said quietly. Not after last night. Fennell smiled through her tears. No, I suppose I'm not. Ava looked up at Fennell. Are you still scared? Fennell considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. A little. But not as much as I was. Your papa helped me remember something important. What's that? That being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right, even when you are afraid. Ava nodded wisely. Papa says that too. He says courage is just scared people who keep moving forward. Wesley felt his throat tighten. He'd said those exact words to her after Sarah's funeral, when Ava had been afraid to leave the house, afraid that if she went outside something else terrible would happen. Fennell reached over and took Wesley's hand. The gesture was simple, natural, not romantic but deeply intimate. A connection forged in crisis, but built on something more substantial than adrenaline. What will you do? She asked. After this is over? Wesley looked down at their joined hands. I'll take Ava home. Make her pancakes. Help her catch up on the schoolwork she missed. Go back to work and pretend none of this happened. Can you really do that? Pretend? He met her eyes. I don't know. Last night, I remembered what it feels like to use these skills for something that matters. Not for orders or politics or bureaucracy, but for a person who needed help. That's different. You saved my life, Wesley. Multiple times. That's more than different. That's extraordinary. Anyone would have done the same. No, Fennell said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have looked the other way. Told themselves it wasn't their problem. But you didn't. You ran toward danger when you could have walked away. That makes you remarkable. Wesley didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent 3 years trying to convince himself that leaving SWAT had been a failure, that walking away made him weak. But sitting here in the morning light, holding the hand of a woman he'd helped save, watching his daughter hum contentedly, he felt something shift inside his chest. Maybe leaving hadn't been failure. Maybe it had been preparation for this moment, for the chance to help someone without the weight of a broken system on his shoulders. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Fennell? He called out. She stood, pulling Wesley to his feet. That's Nathan. My journalist contact. Wesley picked up Ava and walked with Fennell to the car. Nathan got out and embraced Fennell tightly, then turned to Wesley with an extended hand. Thank you, Nathan said simply. For keeping her safe. Wesley shook his hand. Just doing what needed to be done. Nathan opened the back door. We should go. I have a secure facility about 30 minutes from here. Fennell, you'll be able to upload the files and make a statement. After that, we'll coordinate with federal authorities for your protection. Fennell turned to Wesley and Ava. She knelt down in front of the little one and pulled the plastic whistle from her pocket. I believe this belongs to you. Ava shook her head. You keep it. For emergencies. Fennell's eyes filled with fresh tears. She hugged Ava tightly, then stood and faced Wesley. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, an entire conversation passing between them without words. Will I see you again? She asked quietly. Wesley glanced at Ava, then back at Fennell. I think so. When the dust settles and you're safe, we'll find each other. Promise? Promise. Fennell reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. Then she leaned in and kissed his cheek, a gesture of gratitude and something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Thank you, Wesley Ford, she whispered, for reminding me that there are still good people in this world. She climbed into the sedan. Nathan got behind the wheel, and the car pulled away from the curb. Wesley and Ava stood on the sidewalk, watching until it disappeared around a corner. Ava looked up at her father. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Wesley squeezed her hand. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think she will. Do you like her?" The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his daughter's knowing eyes and realized he couldn't lie to her. "Yeah, I do." "Good," Ava said matter-of-factly. "She needs someone like you. And you need someone like her." Wesley laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise, Papa. You just don't always listen." They started walking, hand in hand, toward the bus station that would take them back to Seattle. The morning sun warmed their faces, and for the first time in years, Wesley Ford felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope for a future that wasn't just about survival, but about truly living. 3 months later, Wesley stood in the lobby of a gleaming office building in downtown Seattle, feeling distinctly out of place in his borrowed suit jacket. Ava stood beside him wearing her favorite dress, the one with the sunflowers, her hair pulled back in careful braids. "You look nervous, Papa," she observed. "I am nervous," he admitted. "Why?" "You saved her life." "She's not scary." Wesley smiled despite himself. "It's not about being scary, sweetheart. It's about things being different now." The elevator doors opened, and a woman in a professional pantsuit stepped out. "Mr. Ford, Miss Crestwind is ready to see you." They rode the elevator to the 23rd floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that was all glass steel and carefully curated modern art. But what caught Wesley's attention was the wall of screens behind the reception desk, each one displaying news coverage. "Tech CEO exposes massive corruption network," read one headline. "Helix Dynamics founder testifies before Senate," declared another. "Crestwind files lead to dozens of arrests," proclaimed a third. The receptionist led them down a hallway and opened a door to a corner office. Fennell stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city. She turned when they entered, and her face transformed with a smile that reached her eyes. "Wesley, Ava." She crossed the room quickly and hugged them both. "Thank you for coming." She looked different from that desperate night 3 months ago. Her hair was styled, her clothes immaculate, her posture confident. But her eyes held the same warmth, the same recognition of shared experience. "How are you?" Wesley asked. "Alive, thanks to you. The files are public, the investigations are underway, and I've somehow become the face of corporate whistleblowing." She gestured to the screens visible through her office window. "It's been overwhelming but necessary. Any more threats?" "A few. But the FBI has been helpful, and once the information was public, I stopped being a target and became a witness. Just like you said." Ava tugged on Fennell's sleeve. "Did you get shoes?" Fennell laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "I did, several pairs. Would you like to see?" She led them to a seating area in her office and opened a closet revealing a modest collection of professional footwear. Ava examined each pair with serious concentration, finally pronouncing a pair of navy blue flats as very sensible. Wesley watched the interaction with a fullness in his chest he couldn't quite name. These two people, brought together by crisis, had formed a bond that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Fennell sat down across from Wesley, her expression turning serious. "I asked you here for a reason. One, want to start a foundation, something focused on protecting whistleblowers and supporting people who take personal risks to expose corruption. People who do the right thing, even when it costs them everything." Wesley nodded slowly. "That sounds important." "It is. And I want you to be part of it." He blinked, surprised. "Me?" "You. I need someone who understands protection, security, risk assessment. Someone who knows what it means to stand up when it's easier to look away." She leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to give up your life or your privacy. I'm asking you to consult, to help build something that matters." A few hours a week, flexible schedule, working from home when possible. And the compensation would be enough to give Ava opportunities you couldn't provide on a janitor's salary. Wesley looked at his daughter, who was now examining a globe on Fennell's desk with intense focus. I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that. You're the most qualified person I know, Fennell said firmly. You saved my life with nothing but instinct, improvisation, and an absolute refusal to give up. Those are exactly the qualities this foundation needs. I'd need to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. Ava spun the globe, then looked up. Papa should do it. He's really good at helping people. And you need help helping people. It makes sense. Fennell and Wesley both laughed. She makes a compelling argument, Fennell said. Wesley stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. For 3 years, he'd hidden from his past, convinced that his skills only had value in a world he'd rejected. But maybe Ava was right. Maybe there was a way to use what he knew for something meaningful, something that didn't require compromising his principles. Can I ask you something? He said, not turning from the window. Anything. That night, when your daughter asked if we should help, you could have said no. Could have told me to stay out of it, that it wasn't our problem. Why didn't you? Fennell was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because I was raised to believe that we're responsible for each other. That having the ability to help creates an obligation to try. My sister used to say that the world doesn't change because of grand gestures. It changes because ordinary people make extraordinary choices in small moments. Wesley turned back to face her. Your sister sounds like she was a remarkable person. She was. And she would have liked you. Their eyes held, and in that moment Wesley understood something fundamental. This wasn't just about a job or a foundation. It was about building something meaningful from the wreckage of that terrible night. About transforming crisis into purpose. I'll do it, he said. But on one condition. Name it. Ava comes with me when I work. She's part of this too. Fennell smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next hour, they discussed details, timelines, and possibilities. Ava contributed her own suggestions, including a proposal for a kids' corner where young people could learn about standing up for what's right. By the time they left, Wesley felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about the future. As they rode the elevator down, Ava squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, Papa. Wesley looked down at his daughter, this wise, brave little soul who'd somehow become his moral compass. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. You started all this, you know, by asking if we should help. Well, Ava said thoughtfully, Mama always said that the hardest questions have the simplest answers. We should help because we can help. It's not complicated. Wesley pulled her into a hug as the elevator descended. She was right. It wasn't complicated. In a world that tried to make everything murky and unclear, some truths remained beautifully simple. Help when you can. Stand up when it matters. Choose courage over comfort. Outside, the Seattle afternoon was bright and clear. Wesley and Ava walked hand in hand toward the bus stop, but Wesley found himself looking back at the building one more time. Somewhere up there, Fennell was building something that would outlast all of them. A legacy of protection for those brave enough to speak truth to power. And somehow, impossibly, a janitor with a troubled past and a 9-year-old with a wise heart had become part of that legacy. Wesley thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Broken and bitter and convinced his best days were behind him. Then he thought about the man he was becoming. Someone who'd learned that redemption doesn't come from erasing the past, but from choosing differently in the present. Papa? Ava asked as they waited for the bus. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think we'll have more adventures? Wesley smiled, thinking about whistleblowers who'd need protection, corrupt systems that needed exposing, and all the small moments where ordinary people would be called to make extraordinary choices. I think, he said carefully. That we're just getting started. The bus arrived and they climbed aboard. As it pulled away from the curb, Wesley looked out the window at the city that had almost destroyed him, but had ultimately given him a second chance. He thought about Finale and the foundation they were building together. About Ava and the lessons she was learning about courage and compassion. About the skills he'd tried to bury that had turned out to be exactly what the world needed, when used for the right reasons. And for the first time in years, Wesley Ford felt complete. Not because he'd reclaimed his old life, but because he'd built a new one. One where being a father, a protector, and a force for good weren't separate identities, but parts of a meaningful whole. The evening sun painted the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and amber as the bus carried them home. Ava leaned against Wesley's shoulder, already half asleep, a small smile on her face. "I love you, Papa," she murmured. "I love you too, sweetheart," he whispered back. "More than you'll ever know." And in that simple exchange, in the warmth of his daughter's trust and the promise of purpose renewed, Wesley found everything he'd been searching for. Not redemption from his past, but peace with his present. Not a return to who he'd been, but acceptance of who he'd become. Not an ending, but a beginning. And sometimes, that was the greatest legacy of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.